Welcome back to another FPL video. Today we're talking about the best wildcard team for Game Week 5. A lot of you are considering using the chip during the international break, and I'll be talking about some of the pros and cons and also this 15-man squad, what I would do if I were activating the wildcard this week. If you also want to see a best free hit team video to maybe have an idea of the best transfers for Game Week 5, and also if you're considering using the free hit, then be sure to smash the like button and also let your feelings known down in the comment section below. But let's start from the goalkeepers all the way up to the forward line. Later on, I'll be using FPL Team to preview the Game Week 5 lineup with this wildcard squad. And if you also are considering supporting the channel even further, then be sure to become a channel member or a patron. As a channel member, even starting from the basic tier, you can have your channel featured on the front page of my channel and also have exclusive early access to all of my videos, and the same goes for patron in that respect too. But let's get straight into this video and I hope you enjoy it. In FPL, I typically recommend these 4.5 million goalkeepers or trying to find those cheaper alternatives. But this time I have gone for Alisson. Liverpool have a very good long-term fixture run, and Alisson is always up there in terms of FPL points amongst goalkeepers. Even in a bad Liverpool season, he can still get plenty of clean sheets, bonus points and saves, and that's why Alisson is well worth the money. And it's also a way of covering Trent Alexander-Arnold. Of course, Trent will score more points, get assists and bonus points as he did against Aston Villa, but I think Alisson is still a top option and I'd thoroughly recommend him as a way of covering the Liverpool defence. I think he is the second best way of doing so behind Trent Alexander-Arnold, but he's also 2.5 million cheaper, and that's another factor to consider when making your goalkeeper decision as well. And there are some alternatives if you want to go for someone cheaper, like Leno, who has just gone up in price to 4.6 million. He's got some decent fixtures, starting with Luton Town at home in Game Week 5, but I don't trust Fulham defensively. And having Leno and Areola, there's a very good goalkeeper rotation there in terms of fixtures, but I don't trust Fulham and West Ham defensively to be starting one of their goalkeepers week in, week out. But it's certainly not a bad call, and Leno has an extremely high ceiling. He makes plenty of saves, with the only exception being the game against Manchester City, and he's also very good for bonus points whenever Fulham keep a clean sheet. So apart from Alisson, I'd also look at Leno as your main starting goalkeeper, or even possibly a Flecken. But at this moment in time, I think Alisson Becker is the best of the lot. As for the 4.1 or 4 million backup goalkeeper, you've got Turner and Areola to choose from, but Areola is pretty much the undisputed number one at this moment in time. He's had a very good start to the season. The fixtures are poor over the next 4 game weeks, but when you look at Turner, the alternative as a 4 million option, he's got competition from Vlachodimos, who was signed by Benfica. If you watch my UCL fantasy videos, you would have heard of Vlachodimos by now. But I'm a bit worried about Turner in the long term. I think he'll maintain his spot for now, but he could certainly drop down to the bench at some stage. So I think Areola is your best shot for a backup goalkeeper, and Alisson can start pretty much every single week with those fixtures for Liverpool. And also, I think Liverpool will be right up there by the end of this Premier League season. I will admit, this defence looks a bit weaker than the previous wildcard drafts I've shown you, but it's also to facilitate some moves in other positions, and I will show you an alternative squad which has a better defence and maybe a more balanced squad overall. But I have gone for Akanji. I think he's the best bet for a Man City defender. He can play centre-back, left-back and right-back, and apart from that time he was injured against Sheffield United, he's pretty much started every single game for Man City, and I think he's a really good long-term solution. He's not going to get many bonus points, goals, assists, and he could get the occasional benching, but he's going to start most games for a Man City defender, and I'd back the citizens to keep the most clean sheets this season. And of course, you can consider going for Ederson in goal and then going for a Liverpool defender instead, but I do prefer this Alisson and Akanji double-up compared to Ederson and Trent, which is going to be more expensive overall. I've also gone for Rico Henry, and I have to be honest, I would rather go for Botman, but he's got an injury problem at the moment, and until he's cleared, I can't really recommend him. So I'm putting Rico Henry. He's got some decent fixtures still, but ideally, if Botman is cleared to play in Game Week 5 and you're looking to use the wildcard now, I would put Botman instead of Rico Henry. As for a doggy, you can bench him against Arsenal and Liverpool in Game Week 6 and 7, but in Game Week 5, he's one of the best defenders in the game for that week, and he's also pretty good in the long term, and Spurs' fixtures look pretty good up until Game Week 10 overall. So So I think Udogie is the best shout there. I do like Pedro Porro, but he's going to be more of a rotation risk with Emerson Real as well. And I think Udogie is a bit more nailed on the left-hand side, but that doesn't mean he can't be benched occasionally, and I still think it could happen at some stage. So I'm still looking at that situation. You've got Vicario in goal too to cover the Spurs defence. Romero has had an almost flawless start to the season, but Udogie is my preference at the moment in the heart of that Spurs defence. I've also gone for Matty Cash, who's playing a really advanced right midfielder role for Aston Villa. He scored a brace against Burnley a few weeks ago, and he's got some pretty good long-term fixtures too. I don't trust Aston Villa fully defensively, especially in those big games away from home. They've been battered by Liverpool and Newcastle already, but against the other teams I think they'll do fine, and also at Villa Park they can beat most teams there. So I think Cash is a solid option in the defence. As for Bell, he's a 4 million enabler, and he also has a double game week in game week 7, and I think they have a better double compared to Burnley. So I think having Bell there is fine. He's not going to be an amazing option. I definitely wouldn't start him this week despite facing Fulham, but in game week 7 you can start him there and then bench him in every other game week. Whilst the midfield looks really solid, having Mohamed Salah can be detrimental to other positions in your squad, such as the defence, which is arguably weaker as a result. But with those long-term fixtures for Liverpool, Salah's showing some incredible consistency as well. I think he is a great option on the wild card. As part of a free transfer, I discussed this in the transfer tips video, I'm a bit less sure, and I'd maybe hold off a little bit longer from that move. But in game week 5, I would even arguably captain him over Erling Haaland. I think he's a good option away from home to Wolverhampton Wanderers, and I think Salah is a good option regardless. He's always going to tick along nicely, be consistent, but he is 12.5 million, and you have to ask yourself the question, are you going to captain him enough to justify that price tag? And so far this season that hasn't been the case, and he hasn't really delivered. Despite doing a really good job overall, he hasn't delivered to the levels where you think he's a must-have and he justifies that price tag fully. But around game week 8 or 9, that is probably the best time to buy Salah, whether it's a free transfer, free hit, or a wild card. But at this moment in time, it's still decent on the wild card, and I would still consider the possibility of having Salah. Of course, if you want another Liverpool attacker, Darwin Núñez and Luis Diaz look like really good alternatives as well. As for Bukayo Saka, he's going to tick along nicely. The fixtures aren't great overall, but over the next 3 game weeks, he faces Everton away and Bournemouth away, and Saka and Arsenal should do pretty well in most of these fixtures from an offensive perspective. I do worry about them in the defence though, and that's why I haven't gone for a single Arsenal defender. Whilst you can consider Saliba, Ben White, Gabriel even at this moment in time, I'm actually more concerned about the defence, and I'd rather go for the attackers. Even a double up in the midfield isn't the worst thing in the world, at least for a short-term play, but I'd rather balance things out and go for Saka, Salah, and also have players from other teams as well, like Mbeumo for Brentford, who faces Newcastle away in game week 5, and I would back Newcastle to respond well and perhaps get the victory. But Mbeumo is still really good overall. He ticks along nicely. He scored an amazing goal to equalise in the dying embers of the game against Bournemouth, and he's also had a really good start to the season. He's the highest scoring midfielder. He's on penalties. The underlying numbers also back things up, and he's had a very good start. So I'm really happy with him. And as for Diaby, he did blank in game week 4, but I'm still backing him to do extremely well with these fixtures coming up. And at this moment in time, he looks like the better option compared to Ollie Watkins, who's 1.4 million more expensive. So Diaby has had a great start to life in the Premier League, and I'm expecting him to continue and take things a step further. The underlying numbers also suggest he's going to keep on delivering, and I talked about him in depth in the transfer tips video, so be sure to check that out. The final midfielder is James Maddison. Despite Heung-min Son being the flavour of the month, I'd still go for James Maddison. He is my preference in the midfield, and there is still a possibility, whether it's now in game week 5 or later on in the season, that Heung-min Son has shifted back to the left, and that's where he's going to be less effective as an FPL option. But at this moment in time, I think Solomon will play on the left. It will be Heung-min Son down the middle, Richarlison on the bench, and James Maddison pulling the strings in behind. But if I had to pick one Spurs player and midfielder, the answer would still be James Maddison. The front three is pretty standard. Erling Haaland is the go-to captaincy option, and the only time you can consider going without him is around game weeks 8 to 13, but at this moment in time, that's not going to be an issue. I'd still probably recommend keeping him for the entire season unless he gets injured, so I'm not going to discuss him too much. But Cameron Archer is the best 4.5 million forward at the moment, and I think he's a decent option sometimes to even start or come off the bench as your first substitute. So he's actually a pretty decent option at that price point. Nothing special, but he can get the occasional return, and he's always shown a bit of promise in pre-season for Aston Villa in years gone past, and now at Sheffield United he's going to be the main man up front. So Archer is the best 4.5 million forward. Now, in terms of the second striker you're going to start in most weeks, I have gone for Julian Alvarez, but I am a bit concerned about a few things. So Lautaro Martinez started against Ecuador for Argentina a few days ago, and now against Bolivia, I have a feeling it could be Alvarez starting down the middle, and that could be one of the few changes Argentina make. And that means that Alvarez will be playing in La Paz in Bolivia, where the altitude is something like 12,000 feet above sea level, and that's going to be absolutely decimating to anybody physically. It's even someone as young as Alvarez and as really talented as him, he could struggle a lot. And just a few days later, he plays against West Ham United in Game Week 5. So I would be a bit concerned. There is a possibility of him being benched in Game Week 5 because of that, and I think he will start for Argentina. If he doesn't, then of course I'd be a bit less concerned, but that is certainly something to think about. And also when the Champions League comes along, Man City options will be a rotation risk. Like Akanji even, Alvarez, Phil Foden, they could all be subject to rotation from time to time in these plum fixtures where you really want them to start and get the points, and that could be extremely frustrating. So this wildcard squad involves 3 Man City players, and that could be a huge risk. Even if you include Newcastle players with their group of death, there could be rotation in the Premier League as they focus more on the Champions League, especially if results don't go their way very soon in the Premier League and they kind of write things off for the time being. But I still think Alvarez is one of the best forwards to buy on the wild card, and also with your normal transfers in Game Week 5. The alternative would be Wissa, around 6 million, and also Awani, who looks really impressive, not just at the start of this campaign, but also towards the end of last season. But Alvarez will be my pick at this moment in time. Just be very careful about things in the international break that could have an impact on Game Week 5, and I think Alvarez could be benched against West Ham United. But afterwards, I'd expect him to start most games for Man City, especially if Kevin De Bruyne is still out injured. So now what I'm going to do is head over to FPL.team, show you the lineup for Game Week 5 using this wildcard squad, and then show you some alternative picks if you don't want to go with Salah, and maybe spread the funds across the rest of your team. There are no surprises between the sticks. I'm going to go for Alisson over Areola. There is no chance I'm starting the West Ham goalkeeper at home to Man City. I'm also going for a back three of Akanji, Cash and Udogie. And whilst Akanji's fixture looks tough on paper, I would back Man City for the win and also a clean sheet on top of that. In terms of the midfield, I'm starting all of them in Mbumo, Saka, Maddison, Salah and Diaby, and a front two of Haaland and Alvarez. If Alvarez starts against Bolivia in La Paz, then I would heavily consider benching him or going for another forward entirely, at least for the time being. But of course, that is a tricky decision to make, and even if he starts against Bolivia, there is still a chance he starts at the weekend against West Ham as well. But I believe that game will take a lot out of him physically, so that could be a huge cause for concern. In terms of the captaincy, I'm going for Salah, which the algorithms do favour. FPL.team has Salah at 7.2 expected points, whilst Haaland is at 6.5, and I think Salah is narrowly the better captaincy option this week. On paper, you could argue that Heung-min Son at home to Sheffield United is the best of the lot, but in terms of this wildcard squad, I am going for Salah captain and Haaland as the vice. Now let me show you a few changes to the squad, a few alternative picks if you don't want to go for Salah and maybe spread things a little bit more, and then you can let me know which draft you prefer. Maybe some of you will prefer the one coming up, and that's completely fine. It's all down to personal taste. And also, if you look at my previous wildcard videos, there are still some really good drafts that can really help you in Game Week 5. I have gone for the same goalkeepers here, but you can go for cheaper alternatives such as Leno or Flecken instead of Alisson. And if you want a really good kind of goalkeeper combination in terms of fixtures, then I think Fulham and West Ham have the best combination, and Leno and Areola could be the solution to your issue. I've also gone for a back three of Trippier, Cash and Udogie. So Trippier is the main difference. He comes in for Rico Henry, and I would rather have a Newcastle defender than Rico Henry, and ideally it would be Botman, but if he isn't available, then I think Trippier is the next best. You can also go for Fabian Schär, to be fair, but he also gets quite a few injury problems over the course of the season. I've also gone for a few changes in the midfield, so Mbumo, Saka and Maddison keep their place, but I've gone for Bruno Fernandes and Sterling, and if you want to go for a double up in Spurs attack, then you could go for Heung-min Son instead of Bruno Fernandes, but I would back Fernandes longer term than Heung-min Son, and Man United's fixtures turn very soon around Game Week 6. I'm also going for a front two of Haaland and Darwin Núñez this time out. I'm a bit concerned about Darwin in terms of his long-term minutes, but for the time being, he should start. He got 2 assists against Aston Villa. He scored a brace against Newcastle the week before that. And even for Uruguay, he has done really well in that match against Chile. He got an assist and had a really good performance overall. And as for the bench, you've got Areola, Akanji, Bell, and Archer. So not too many changes, but there's a few things you can tweak here and there to get a Newcastle defender, maybe a different goalkeeper. And in terms of a forward, if you're a bit unsure about Julian Alvarez, then you can go for Darwin Nunez, Ollie Watkins, Awani, Wissa. There's not too many forwards overall, but I think there's a pool of 5 or 6 that offer pretty good solid options for your FPL team. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's try to get this video to the 300 likes. Let's keep on pushing towards 20,000 subscribers and beyond. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for the Patreon, Championships Discord server, and the FPL League. I'd highly encourage you to join all of those platforms. I wish you all the best of luck for Game Week 5 and hope you enjoy the rest of the international break. And I'll see you next time.